Alright, in this video we're going to talk about factoring by grouping, okay? Also known to some as the AC method. Now, when we factor by grouping, okay, first of all we're going to talk about factoring out a common factor. And we can solve by factoring out a common factor. So if there's an example 1 here, we want to factor this to solve. Well, we look here at the numbers 4 and 6, and both of those we can pull out a 2. And also both terms have an x, so we can pull that out. And we're dividing it out, so 4 divided by 2 is 2, and x squared divided by x is x. You can always check yourself, because once you factor something, the two things you have, 2x and 2x, they should multiply to be 4x squared, and they do. So plus, and then 6 divided by 2 is 3, and then of course we took the x out, so we have this. 2x times 2x plus 3. Again, if we were to distribute that, if we wanted to do that, we would get right back to 4x squared plus 6x. That was our check to make sure we've done it correctly. So now we took the zero product property, that if two things multiply to be 0, then one of the two things has to be 0. So either 2x equals 0 or 2x plus 3 equals 0. Of course, if we solve that, we get x equals 0. If we solve here, we subtract 3 and divide by 2. We get x equals negative 3 halves. Those would be our two solutions. Okay. So of course you can pause this video and try this one and then come back and see if you've done it correctly. Alright, so if I'm factoring this one, I can see a negative 5 can come out. I'm going to pull out the negative 5, pull out the negative with it, and an x can come out. And so what I have here is x and then minus 2 equals 0. So negative 5x equals 0 and x minus 2 equals 0. So of course here x equals 0 and then here x equals 2. Those would be our two solutions. Okay, before we get to the meat and bones of factoring by grouping, we're going to do a simple one. And here's a way we can factor by grouping, and we're going to solve at the same time. Well, factoring is just part of our solution process. We could factor just to factor, but in this case we use it for solving. So I look at this function, solve it, 3x squared plus 9x minus 4x minus 12 equals 0. Now, I see that I can't pull something out of all of those terms. I can't take, there's not a common factor that goes into all of those terms. However, if I group the first two terms and the second two terms, and notice I include the negative sign there with it, and part of that second two terms, and there's a reason for that. And then there is something I can factor out of the first group, which is a 3x can be factored out of the first group, and then I'm left with x plus 3. Now out of the second group, I see that a negative 4 goes into the first one, and it also goes into the second one, and I end up again with x plus 3. Notice that these two are the same. That, and when we're doing our solving by grouping, that needs to happen each time. Those two need to be the same. Okay? So I can now, since both of these have an x plus 3, I can factor out an x plus 3. And what's left is the 3x and the minus 4. So now I have x plus 3 equals 0, using the zero product property again, or 3x minus 4 equals 0. This one is x equals negative 3. And down here I would add 4 and divide by 3, so x equals 4/3. Okay, now they're not going to always give it to you in this format where you have the 4 terms there. And actually you're going to create those terms for yourselves, and then you're going to do exactly what we just did. Okay, so here's how we're going to factor by grouping and solve. We're actually solving with factoring by grouping. Okay, first of all, we multiply a times c, a and c. And then we're going to find two numbers that add to be b, right here, and multiply to be a times c. And then we use the two numbers to split the middle term into two terms. We're going to group the first two terms and the second two terms, and we're going to factor and solve. So it's going to look very much like what we just did, but we have to give ourselves the two middle terms. All right, so we want to solve 2x squared plus 9x minus 35 equals 0. First step, 2 times negative 35 is negative 70. Okay, so we need to find two numbers that add to 9, right from there, and multiply to negative 70. Well, we know these two, 2 and negative 35, they multiply to negative 70. But if we add them, we get negative 33. Well, that doesn't work. Even if we switch the sign, because negative 2 and positive 35, they also multiply to be negative 70, but that would just give us positive 33. So we need to find something bigger. This 9, 33 is bigger than 9, which means our factors are too far apart. We need to find factors that are closer together. Okay? So 2, I'm going to try something bigger than 2, something else that goes into 70. Well, 10 obviously works. So how about negative 10 times 7? But negative 10 plus 7 is negative 3. Well, then what about 10 and negative 7? Well, no, that would just be positive 3. So, well, again, there's a little bit of guess and check here, but now, if 10 works, then 5 must also work. What about 5 times negative 14, which is also negative 70? But 5 plus negative 14 is negative 9, so we need negative 5 and positive 14 then. So those are our two numbers. They add to be positive 9 and they multiply to be negative 70. So you can see there's a little bit of guess and check there, ways that you can shorten it up for yourself. So let's take and do our math here. Now 2x squared minus 5x plus 14x minus 35 equals 0. And actually, if you're wondering, what if I put the 14x first? It actually doesn't matter. You'll get the same answer in the end. Your steps will look a little different, but at the end you'll end up at the same spot. Okay. Now I'm going to group them, and I'm going to factor. Now I can't take anything out of 2 and 5, so I'm just going to pull out an x, because I can't pull out a number out of 2 and 5. What I'm left with then is 2x minus 5. Now the nice part about grouping here is I know that this also needs to be 2x minus 5. It has to be, otherwise this is not going to work. So if I can't find a number that's going to make that work, then I should start over. So I just take 14 divided by 2 is 7. Is negative 35 divided by 7 negative 5? Yes. So this number is 7. So then we factor out a 2x minus 5, and what's left is an x plus 7. 2x minus 5 equals 0, x plus 7 equals 0. So if I add 5 and divide by 2, I get x equals 5 halves, or x equals negative 7. Good. Let's look at another one. Okay, let's look at another one. First of all, we should recognize when this number is not 1. When it's not 1, that's when we're going to end up using, so we're going to solve with factoring by grouping. Okay? So same thing, we take 5 times negative 32. 5 times negative 32 is negative 160. So I need two numbers, they need to add to negative 12. Well, 5 and negative 32 is not going to add to negative 12. That'd be negative 27. That's too big, so we need to make our numbers closer together. So we need to find things that are closer together that also multiply to be. So obviously 10 goes in. So I would have 10 times negative 16, but those are not going to add to negative 12. They need to be farther apart than that. So then 20 times negative 8 also equals, but that equals, when we add them, that's positive 12, so we actually need negative 20 and positive 8. And those are our two numbers that we're going to split the middle term with. So 5x squared minus 20x plus 8x minus 32 equals 0. Group the first two and the last two, including that negative sign. That's a positive sign, so we don't need it, but that's okay. It's a plus sign. So then now I factor the first two. I can pull out a 5 and an x, and I'm left with x minus 4 plus. Now this has to also be x minus 4. So what 8x divided by 8 would give me x, and just check, negative 32 divided by 8, is it negative 4? Yes. So we have our match, we pull that out, and what's left is the 5x and the plus 8, and then we set each of those equal to 0. So here x equals 4, or subtract 8, so negative 8, divide by 5, and there are our two solutions.